At Qingdao, the cranes have gone still, leaving cargo ships loaded with critical minerals stranded off China's coast, minerals essential for America's military. Overnight, Beijing halts all rare earth exports, no exceptions. U.S. defense production grinds to a halt within hours. The Pentagon labels it sabotage. Beijing calls it policy. Yet, the data is stark. 78% of U.S. weaponry relies on materials under China's control. Fighter jets, missiles, radar systems, all dependent on a resource Washington can't access. War rooms grapple with a single question. How do you confront a superpower that can choke your supply chain at the source? By the hour's end, New York traders dub it Beijing's silent embargo. The timing is deliberate. Just 2 days before Donald Trump and Xi Jinping's scheduled meeting in Seoul, China's Ministry of Commerce tightened its export controls, adding 5 more rare earth elements to the restricted list. Reuters reports this now encompasses 12 critical elements and numerous categories of mining and refining equipment. Beijing framed it as a national security move. Markets saw it as a calculated signal. Mid-flight, Trump, informed of the news, slammed his hand on the armrest. "They waited for this moment," he said, per an aide. "They're angling for leverage." The Wall Street Journal reported Trump promptly directed his trade team to draft 100% retaliatory tariffs. Beneath the jargon of export licenses lies the crisis's core. China refines over 90% of global rare earths, vital for precision-guided missiles, radar systems, fighter jet engines, and electric motors in drones and submarines. The U.S. can mine some of these materials but lacks large-scale refining capacity. As the Financial Times noted, the bottleneck isn't the mine, it's the refinery. This gap now risks crippling the U.S. military-industrial complex. A recent Gavini study analyzing Pentagon supply chains found over 80,000 components across nearly 1,900 U.S. weapon systems rely on Chinese-sourced minerals. That's 78% of all Department of Defense platforms. The Gavini report details the breakdown. The Navy relies on China for 92% of its weapon systems minerals. Take the F-35, America's cutting-edge fighter jet. Bloomberg notes each contains nearly 900 pounds of rare earth elements, critical for guidance systems, sensors, and flight controls. Even if the U.S. sourced raw ores elsewhere, refining still largely happens in China. Australia and Canada have deposits, but their ores are typically sent to Chinese refineries for processing. That's the true bind. Mining is about geology. Processing is China's monopoly. When China restricted graphite exports in 2023, it was seen as an energy issue, but it laid the groundwork for a broader strategy. The 2025 expansion, covering lithium-ion batteries, synthetic diamonds, and key rare earths, reveals how Beijing turns industrial supply chains into geopolitical leverage. Meanwhile, the U.S. has long outsourced its capabilities. In the 1980s, Washington closed its largest rare earth facility at Mountain Pass, California, after China undercut global prices. When the mine later reopened, China's refining network was so dominant that rebuilding a U.S. equivalent would take decades. This week's restrictions highlight how that imbalance translates into power. The Wall Street Journal reports that Beijing's new rules extend to foreign companies using Chinese origin materials, meaning a magnet made in South Korea or Germany could still be subject to Chinese export controls if any component was processed in China. Inside the Pentagon, logistics officers are running quiet war games, not focused on tanks or missiles, but on supply chain vulnerabilities. One scenario models a month-long halt in Chinese rare earth shipments, leading to a complete stop in missile guidance production within 6 weeks. Within 8 weeks, aircraft radar assembly lines slow. By 12 weeks, Navy propulsion systems face component shortages. These figures come from the Defense Logistics Agency's dependency assessments. Yet Beijing's stance isn't purely aggressive. Chinese officials claim they're retaliating against U.S. restrictions on advanced semiconductor exports. As Reuters quoted the Ministry of Commerce, "Our measures are defensive and legitimate." The pattern mirrors. Washington restricts chips, Beijing restricts minerals. Both citing national security, both exploit interdependence. But the issue isn't solely about who controls the metals. It's about who can endure the wait. A 60-day license delay can halt an entire U.S. production line as factories rely on just-in-time procurement not built for strategic standoffs. Beijing's licensing process is deliberately opaque, leaving even allies like Germany and Japan to seek approval without guaranteed outcomes or timelines. China has mastered calibrated pressure. When the U.S. curbed chip exports, Beijing avoided blanket bans, opting for ambiguous rules, flexible for political leverage, firm enough to unsettle markets. That uncertainty alone drives up costs. Bloomberg data shows neodymium oxide prices, vital for military-grade magnets, have surged 22% since the announcement. The Financial Times reports automakers paying up to 20% premiums for non-Chinese suppliers in Vietnam and Estonia. Yet these suppliers often source feedstock from China. Washington's diversification efforts reveal a system looping back to Chinese ports. The rare earth crisis isn't just about dependence, it's about belated awareness. For years, U.S. defense officials claimed stockpiles and allies would shield against vulnerabilities. But stockpiles dwindle and allies face the same licensing hurdles. Japan, South Korea, and Germany all rely on Chinese processed materials, and even Canada's nascent refining projects depend on Chinese equipment. As the Wall Street Journal noted, China's export controls now extend beyond minerals to the machines that process them. Washington's response is urgent but disjointed. Under the Defense Production Act, the Trump administration has poured billions into boosting domestic refining and magnet production. MP Materials, which runs the Mountain Pass mine, secured federal contracts to build a U.S. processing plant, but scaling up will take years. The Pentagon has also started stockpiling antimony, gallium, and tungsten, targeting a 12-month strategic reserve. Yet, even with these efforts, the Gavini report concludes no near-term alternative exists to Chinese refining capacity. Midway through the Seoul summit, Chinese state media issued a terse statement. Licensing will proceed according to national needs. Markets swiftly read national needs as geopolitical leverage. Trump's advisors pressed him to storm out. Instead, he ordered the U.S. Trade Representative to draft retaliatory tariffs on $120 billion in Chinese goods, targeting magnets, EV components, and battery metals. By September, the Pentagon's Internal Critical Materials Task Force delivered a classified recommendation, later summarized by Reuters, calling for a Western Rare Earth Reserve, a joint stockpile overseen by the U.S., Japan, and the EU. The proposal echoes the International Energy Agency's oil reserves, aiming for collective security through a shared supply, but coordination hinges on trust, and allies are now vying for the same limited shipments. Beijing insists the West is overreacting, framing its restrictions as safeguards against misuse. Yet the timing, days before the Trump-Xi meeting, tells a different story. China's leverage is economic, not military, but its impact may outlast any missile test. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense is auditing every contract for exposure to Chinese inputs. Bloomberg reports a surprising finding. Even tools for manufacturing defense electronic semiconductors often rely on China-sourced tungsten and gallium. For decades, the U.S. assumed it could prioritize economic efficiency over strategic risk. That illusion shattered in a warehouse of idle cranes. Now, mineral resilience is a standing line item in every Pentagon budget meeting. Congress is debating subsidies for refining plants in Texas, California, and Saskatchewan, while private companies push for tax credits to build magnet factories. But supply chains forged over 3 decades can't be reshored in 3 years. Meanwhile, China plays the long game. The Financial Times reports Beijing has amassed record stockpiles of rare earths, copper, nickel, and lithium, building redundancy preemptively, not reactively. Trump's national security advisors see parallels to 1970s OPEC, but this time the resource isn't oil. It's the foundation of industrial civilization. Now, if you like this video, check out this next video right here.